This video is brought to you by Nvidia and Gigabyte Aorus's range of RTX 40 series GPUs, delivering super fast, super powered results in games like Alan Wake 2 and Ghost of Tsushima on PC. Click the link below to see how Nvidia and Gigabyte hardware will transform the way you play, or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Before we begin, just a note on spoilers, since I know how much this stuff matters in a game like this. I'm going to be showing you only the first two major bosses. One of them you might have seen in the previews, the other one was spoken about in the previews. The remaining 8 major bosses I'll leave you to discover for yourself. I will show you some, but not all, of the minor bosses you find in the minor dungeons or whatever. I'll show you some of the map regions, but not the more secret areas that are harder to stumble upon, and I won't show you any of the late game regions, since they too are best discovered for yourself. As always, if you'd like to avoid all spoilers, then don't watch any reviews. If you're extra cautious but still curious, then consider listening to this video as you would a podcast. But if you're okay with seeing a few things, then I'm confident this video won't give too much away. Difficult to think of a non-MMO expansion more anticipated than this one. The closest I can think of is Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, but that was very different because that was, for many people, a chance to give Cyberpunk a second chance. Phantom Liberty promised to fix, augment, or expand many of the game's systems and features that were lacking in the base game. Many people who booted up that expansion thought to themselves, will this be the Cyberpunk experience I was promised? Will this deliver where the base game did not? It's a very different starting point here for Elden Ring's first and only expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree. Here, when people boot up this expansion, they're asking themselves, how do you make Elden Ring better? Like, how do you do that? How do you take one of the greatest video games ever made and improve it? That seems like an impossible task, but it's one that FromSoft have faced and failed many times over their storied 38-year history. They have done it again here in Shadow of the Erdtree, an expansion that is so expansive, that is 2 to 3 times larger than most standalone games in this genre. The new region, the Shadowlands, delivers the same sense of breadth and scale that we experienced in the Lands Between, but delivers that in a more condensed form factor. Crucially, some of the regions are among the most dense and intricate that FromSoft have ever delivered, labyrinthine in their layouts and rewarding curious exploration in a way that few games can match. The combat sandbox is expanded with 8 new weapon categories, a range of new spells, and a number of seals and talismans that will subtly but notably expand buildcraft opportunities. The boss encounters are almost all exceptional. Some of them do feel a little familiar, but most of them combine setting, narrative, and mechanics to incredible effect, and the last boss is some serious bullshit in a good way. It is definitely one of the hardest encounters that Elden Ring delivers, potentially even the hardest, but I'll let the community be the judge of that. Interestingly, I found the narrative shone through here in a way that was easier to connect with than in the base game. Much of Elden Ring's narrative was buried in quest lines, but here the pursuit of Miquella is itself a compelling mystery that kept me engaged from the first moment to the last. I really don't have that many criticisms of Erdtree, to be honest with you. Some minor stuff about the world being a little more tricky to navigate here or there, and some damage scaling stuff at the back end of the game. Minor things. I do, however, think at least a little bit about the goals of this expansion and what those goals might have been instead. What I mean by this is, the goal of Erdtree is to provide more Elden Ring, and in this regard, Erdtree is an unqualified success. But what if the goal of this expansion was to deliver experiences that you couldn't get in the main game? What if the goal was to remix aspects of exploration, combat, buildcraft, or boss design? Erdtree doesn't do much of that, and I do think there were some missed opportunities where FromSoft could have brought more innovation to bear. But that is, again, not a criticism. That's just a thought exercise about what could have been, when what's here is so much. At least 50 hours of content, all of it just as memorable and affecting as what you experienced the very first time you stepped foot in the Lands Between. Miyazaki said of Erdtree that he wanted us to again feel that sense of discovery, and you do. You absolutely do. Shadow of the Erdtree is FromSoft's victory lap, conscious that what they delivered the first time around was so extraordinary that no one is going to say no to a second helping of it. Shadow of the Erdtree begins here at Mohg's palace. Mohg has been trying to reanimate the cocoon body of Miquella, but Miquella has abandoned his flesh and now resides in the Land of Shadow, a space separate from the Lands Between. There, a darkened and festooned Erdtree looms over the horizon, a shadowy inversion of the world above. Here, Miquella journeys forth in search of someone or something, his steps guiding yours as you pursue him from the gravestone plains to the most secret and unknowable reaches of the Land of Shadow. Shadow of the Erdtree is not a sequel to Elden Ring, nor is it an epilogue to events that happened in the main game. It's its own standalone experience that happens alongside your quest to become the Elden Lord. Having said that, there are many story elements and characters that are shared between what transpires in the Lands Between and the Land of Shadow. Indeed, one of the best parts of Erdtree is how much it expands upon much of the lore we discovered as we explored the Lands Between. I'm far from a lore expert, but even I found myself able to make connections and discoveries that deepened my understanding and appreciation of this world. Part of that comes from the fact that Shadow of the Erdtree is much more heavy-handed with its narrative without going into the territory of delivering a traditional narrative like we see in most other games. If you've played any FromSoft games, you'll surely know what I mean by that. FromSoft games all have a narrative, but its delivery is very circumspect through allusion, through mutterings of crestfallen NPCs, through architecture and flavor text on items. It's more engaging than most narratives in most video games, but you really have to work to uncover it, assisted in no small part by the lore YouTubers who study it more closely than most of us have time to do. Elden Ring adopted the same approach to storytelling, though it did have a number of quest lines that provided a lot of exposition. The main quest line, though, was kind of just become the Elden Lord, and it would have been easy to miss a lot of the game's storytelling if you were singularly focused on that goal. It's rather different here in Shadow of the Erdtree. Before you even step into the Land of Shadow, you're told that you're to pursue Miquella. When you arrive, one of the first things you see is one of Miquella's crosses, splinters of light that denote where Miquella sheds certain parts of his flesh. At these locations, you'll often meet NPCs or find notes left behind, each of them talking about their relationship to Miquella or providing a report on their progress as they pursue him. Both you and almost everyone else you meet is there to not only find Miquella, but to understand what he's doing here in the Land of Shadow. That gives Shadow of the Erdtree a lot of narrative pull, far more so than the base game delivered. The entire thing feels like a mystery where you're following the clues that Miquella left behind, conversing and theorizing with other NPCs as you all try to solve the enigma that is Miquella. What's so deft about this is that it never strays too far from the classic FromSoft approach to storytelling. The focus remains on show, don't tell, and no NPC interaction or note you find will ever give you a clear-cut answer to any of the questions swirling about. But it does give you enough to stay deeply engaged with events, and I think that adopting this storytelling approach for the main storyline within this DLC is the most innovative addition to the Elden Ring formula, and also one of the most rewarding, delivering a compelling narrative in its own right, while also inviting an entire new wave of fans to tumble deep down the lore rabbit hole.
Long ago, Queen Marika commanded Sir Messmer to purge the Tower folk, a cleansing by fire. It's no wonder the Hornsent holds the Erdtree in contempt. That aside, man is by nature a creature of conquest, and in this regard, the Tower folk are no different.
There is one aspect of Shadow of the Erdtree that feels like it's a response to criticism leveled at the base game. It's the structure of this expansion. More than a few people felt that Elden Ring was bloated, lacking the focus and restraint that FromSoft games were known for. They lamented just how long it took to play through Elden Ring, with your average playthrough clocking in at 80 to 100 hours, a lot of minor dungeons and reused bosses to pad things out. That's not a view that I personally share, but I can certainly understand how people could feel this way. I think these people are going to be impressed with the way that Shadow of the Erdtree is laid out, giving you a lot more agency with regards to how long a playthrough might take. So you should know that you can finish this expansion in like 15 to 20 hours if you choose to beeline the main objective. That's kind of what I did, but I got lost a lot along the way, so I think I finished this game in around about 25 hours. But yeah, had I more luck in uncovering where to go next, I absolutely could have shaved that down to less than 20 hours. That's because of the 10 major bosses present in Shadow of the Erdtree, only a handful of them are required to progress. The rest of them are purely optional, so you can just not do them if you don't want to, or you can come back to them later. Same goes for the map. I'd argue that only about half the map you'll uncover is on the critical path, the rest is, again, totally optional. Similarly, there are way fewer of those small greystone dungeons full of those annoying imp dudes that end in a minor boss battle that unlocks some new gear. Having said that, the greystone dungeons that are there are far more elaborate in their design, in their size, in their rewards, and one of them is way more rewarding than I would have expected, but I'll let you discover that for yourself. So when it comes to structure and playtime, I would actually slice up Shadow of the Erdtree in 3 ways. There's a beeline playthrough that's like 15 to 20 hours. Very lean, it's all about the major dungeons, the narrative and the epic boss battles. That's a playthrough that's going to feel a lot like those more curated Dark Souls or Bloodborne experiences of the past. Next we have your more meandering playthrough where you aim to fight every major boss and see most of what the map has to offer. I'm just finishing up that sort of playthrough right now and I think I'll land at around about 40 hours for that. Finally, there's your completionist playthrough, where you do absolutely everything the expansion has to offer. Speaking to other people who are doing that right now, it sounds like that'll land at around about 60 or so hours. Far more than the base game, Shadow of the Erdtree gives you the ability to choose how much of it you want to play, and what's there feels tighter and leaner and more focused. It does feel like a response to those that found Elden Ring to be too unwieldy, but in making that response, FromSoft haven't sacrificed any of the scale that most players loved about the base game. It's a very surgical intervention that delivers solutions without compromise, and it also makes Shadow of the Erdtree extremely replayable in a way that the base game often struggles to be given its sheer size. Of course, the true measure of this game's replayability is mostly determined by the combat sandbox, where each new weapon or spell can open up entirely new ways to play through the game again using a new build. In this regard, you might argue that Shadow of the Erdtree delivers hundreds of hours of new content, since the 8 new weapon categories, new spells, talismans, and seals all deliver a notable expansion to the game's itemization, and that's setting aside the 10 new legendary weapons that each deliver unique, game-changing L2 attacks. Don't worry, I won't spoil any of those, you'll find them for yourself. I wasn't able to test every weapon properly given the dex and arcane limitations on my build. I also didn't manage to find any throwing weapons or reverse hand swords during my playthrough, but I did test what I could. The light greatsword is a real standout with an elegant flowing moveset. There's a 6-hit combo on the R1 and the R2 is a quick gap closing sweep. It's a very, very satisfying weapon to use. The Great Katana is similarly excellent, delivering the wide arcs you'd expect. However, the L2 on this is actually an overhead stance. Holding it down opens up a whole new moveset with both a heavy hitting drop on the R2 and a quick bouncing combo on the R1. The best feeling new weapon is actually not a weapon at all. It's the new hand-to-hand thing. For a game that is so leveraged into melee weapons, FromSoft really outdid themselves with how good this feels. Every move just flows so smoothly from one to the next, with punches on your R1 and kicks on your R2. There are different Ashes of War for this weapon type, but this one was a palm strike, allowing me to charge it up before unleashing a focus strike with a small AoE effect. Beast Claws were probably my least favorite new weapon type. They're very jittery with some movements and jumps that can sometimes overshoot enemy hitboxes. Still, it could just be a practice thing, but it is a nice addition to the game given that this is an entirely new fighting style we haven't seen before. The thrusting shield is a thrusting shield. You can equip it in your offhand for a quick L1 strike, but you can also mainhand it for a full range of moves that are pretty standard for any melee weapon type really. And finally, the perfume bottles. To be clear, these are not consumables. They are a permanent weapon type that does not consume any FP when you use them. You can mainhand them, but I suspect they'll sit in most people's offhands when you need a good source of free magic damage to exploit an enemy's magic damage weakness. In addition to all of that, there are plenty of new spells and incantations added to the game. I don't exactly know how many, but it's a lot. Personally, I build into Faith, and so I was able to make use of a number of new fire incantations, like one that briefly rains fire in a select area, and another one that sends me high up in the air for a brief moment before pile driving back down in a big ball of flame. Part of the damage that you would have seen there came from my new seal, which specifically buffs fire damage for Mesmer type fire spells. I'm sure there are other seals hidden away somewhere which buff other incantation types. That already has a lot of impact on the viability of certain incantation focused builds. Much the same could be said of talismans. I found over a dozen new talismans, many of them upgrades of those found in the base game, but many of them entirely new, and they too open up the buildcraft side of the game considerably, given how central talismans are to builds. There are also a number of new enemy types here, but not too many. Most of the areas you'll explore are populated with a mix of old and new, but even the new ones still fit into overall categories that feel familiar. Something similar could be said of some of the boss design. Most of the new major bosses are exceptional. Some of them are truly incredible, to be honest. I think the bar set by this dancing dragon boss design is what you should reasonably expect from most of the other boss encounters throughout the rest of the game, which is to say, it is fantastic, truly. But yeah, some of the major bosses do feel like retreads of encounters we've already done, and you do fight minor bosses who are little more than invading phantoms, or bosses we've already fought in the base game. It's a minor complaint in the big scheme of things. You're going to walk away from Shadow of the Erdtree remembering these new epic encounters. You're not going to be dwelling on the fact that you have to fight the Tree Sentinel yet again. One thing I noticed about the bosses was their level of aggression in the opening seconds of a fight. Most Elden Ring bosses will kind of chill a little bit when you step through that fog wall, giving you the time you need to summon a Spirit Ash and maybe cast a few buffs. Not here. Basically, every boss you fight will cast a range spell or do some crazy ass gap closer the second you're in there, immediately getting up in your grill. It puts you on the back foot immediately and makes every encounter feel much more tense as a result. So at this point, you might be wondering about overall difficulty, and it's kind of a complex question to answer. I went in at around about level 120-ish. I wasn't on New Game Plus. It felt challenging, but not unfair, and as I very quickly leveled up and collected more of the Erdtree fragments, which are the collectibles that make you stronger in the Land of Shadow, it felt good. Until I got to the later game areas and the final boss where shit gets really wild. You just start facing a lot of dudes with infinite poise and a lot of health, and they have a quick combo that'll 3-hit you, etc. I've never been a big fan of that sort of enemy design and scaling, since it kind of encourages you to just run past them, but overall I would say that Erdtree isn't significantly more challenging than the base game. However, as I said, I played it on a first playthrough, not New Game Plus. Other people I know were playing it on New Game Plus 7 characters, and they were getting clapped. I spoke to more than one person who just couldn't finish the last boss because it was too hard. So I would say that overall, Erdtree's difficulty is fine unless you're playing on high-level New Game Plus runs, at which point you might struggle based on your skill level. What makes all of this easier are the Erdtree fragments and the revered Spirit Ashes. These are collectibles you'll find throughout the world, and they buff both you and your Spirit Ashes. They provide an increase to survivability and damage, and that is it. It's you find them, and you use them, and you get stronger. They are not an easy mode, in the sense that Shadow of the Erdtree does not become easy when you use them. They're more about keeping up with the aggressive scaling that's present in this region than they are making things easier for you. Having said that, if you are nuts, then you don't have to use them, and you can walk around as a naked level 1 character with no Erdtree buffs. I do look forward to watching those streams, to be honest. Personally, I look at this progression system, and it's one of the few things that disappointed me about Shadow of the Erdtree. It's just a straight stat boost, and that's pretty boring. I'm sure there are good reasons why it exists, allowing From to apply a different difficulty and scaling model to this zone, but it's just not very interesting when it could have been so many other things. Like, imagine if that buff could be applied to things like weight carry limits, allowing you to wear more armor or carry a third weapon. Imagine if it increased status build-up rates. What if it vastly improved FP pools, allowing melee focus builds to cast more spells? What if it changed the scaling of the weapons you acquired in the Land of Shadow, incentivizing you to adopt a new arsenal? I'm just totally spitballing random ideas here, but the point is that a straight stat boost doesn't make the game any different to play, whereas I would have loved to have seen a progression system that opened up new opportunities not available in the base game. Elden Ring's combat sandbox is so unbelievably vast, but most of us will only experience a small fraction of it because we only play through it once. I would have loved that progression system to give me more freedom to experiment with different weapons, armor, incantations, and spells, since that would have been a really brilliant way to showcase and celebrate just how much there is to experience in Elden Ring. That was actually something that God of War Ragnarok's Valhalla DLC did. Its roguelike structure and rewards economy incentivized you to play differently, and it really connected me with parts of the combat sandbox that I never really connected with, even though I spent 40 hours playing the base game. I would have loved to have seen something similar here too. But again, I will reiterate that that is not a criticism of Shadow of the Erdtree. That's just me kind of wishlisting stuff. But I did think about that a lot as I continued to journey through the Land of Shadow. Similarly, I sometimes found myself wishing that the regions had about them more identity. Not visually, mind you, since they all look remarkable. I'm talking more about what it's like to be in them and explore them. We joke a lot about poison swamps because FromSoft loves that shit, and there's some poison swamps here too, make no mistake. There's also plenty of rolling fields fields and old ruins and grand Anor Londo style architecture. But there was really only one region in the Land of Shadow where I felt like there was nothing like this in the base game. I won't spoil it for you, but it involves a gameplay style that is incredibly tense, and it really stood out as a highlight for how well the visual, scenario, and level design coalesced to create something that you just couldn't get in the Lands Between. I think it's telling that the only two substantive points of feedback I have in relation to Shadow of the Erdtree aren't criticisms per se. They're just asking for more in a package that is so massive and so dense and so impressive that it's almost unreasonable to ask for more. As I said at the top of this video, name another expansion to a single player game that delivers 50 plus hours of content, let alone content at this level of quality. Your average Souls-like is between 50 to 20 hours long, and here's an expansion that is delivering 2 to 3 times that. That is crazy. And that's setting aside the replayability that comes from these new sandbox elements. Entirely new weapon types that offer not only new mechanics, but often new fantasies to roleplay. Never before could you be the lone martial arts warrior wandering the Lands Between, but now you can. Never before could you strike with the bestial ferocity that the beast claws enable. Now you can do that. Want to be one of those annoying spinning perfume enemies that wear bed sheets over their head? Now you too can be that annoying. This replayability is further enhanced by the structural streamlining that Shadow of the Erdtree delivers, trimming back on the amount of less impressive dungeons or repeated encounters, and providing a quick and clean beeline path to the final showdown, giving you a lot of agency over how fast or how slow this Shadow of the Erdtree experience might be for you. Personally, I really love how they approach the narrative here. The mystery of Miquella has all the hallmarks of FromSoft's aloof and opaque storytelling, but it's centered in a way that makes your journey feel like a puzzling pilgrimage. Clues and half-truths and notes left behind. With each footfall, you consider not only where you're going next, but why Miquella went that way first. It's a subtle shift in storytelling, but such an important and successful one, and I do hope that FromSoft approach future stories in this way, because not since Sekiro have I felt so connected to a top-line FromSoft narrative. It is somewhat bittersweet that Shadow of the Erdtree marks the end of our Elden Ring journey. FromSoft have confirmed that this will be the only Elden Ring expansion, but I'm heartened by a recent PC Gamer interview with Miyazaki, where he said that he still had not made his ideal fantasy RPG. He said, quote, "While Elden Ring is not quite it, it's pretty close. It's getting close," end quote. If this is close, then I think we're all in for one hell of a treat when Miyazaki delivers the game he's dreaming about. For now, he and everyone else on his team should take a bow, because Shadow of the Erdtree is the perfect curtain call for one of the greatest games ever made. An expansion that manages the impossible task of making us feel that same feeling we had when we stepped out of that tomb and beheld Limgrave for the very first time. Always extremely proud to be able to partner with this video's sponsors, Nvidia and Gigabyte Aorus. That's because together they put out the single best range of GPU hardware on the market, the RTX 40 series of GPUs. 40 series GPUs deliver the absolute cutting edge in graphical processing hardware. This generation's Ada Lovelace architecture delivers an unprecedented and unparalleled level of processing throughput, enabling high settings and higher frame rates in all the games that you love. The hardware is also custom built for immersion, with cores specifically dedicated to ray tracing, the technology that results in the most realistic modeling and recreation of light we've seen in gaming ever. The 40 series GPUs are more than just their hardware. It's also about the suite of technology tools that are enabled by that hardware, like DLSS for example. Nvidia DLSS 3 uses AI to interlace additional frames, resulting in more than double the frame rate in select titles, while Nvidia Reflex works with your monitor to significantly reduce input delay, a huge buff in competitive games where split-second reaction timing is key. It goes even further with how Nvidia 40 series GPUs support what you do outside of the game. Nvidia encoding technology will improve your live streams since it delivers more clarity more efficiently, and Nvidia Broadcast uses AI to block out unwanted background noise during your streams and video recordings. On top of that, Nvidia is always pushing out new driver updates that are the result of direct partnership with developers, making sure that your hardware is able to deliver the absolute best performance possible. If it's an RTX 40 series GPU you're after, then look no further than Gigabyte Aorus, one of the most trusted and respected names in GPU production. Gigabyte Aorus's range of RTX 40 series GPUs deliver market-leading thermals, build quality, and reliability. I've used them for many years, well before they supported the channel, and they've always been exceptional. Speaking of supporting the channel, Nvidia and Gigabyte Aorus have generously donated created a custom-built PC to be given away to one lucky person living in ANZ. The PC is made in-house by Gigabyte Aorus and features an NVIDIA RTX 4070. We're going to be giving this thing away on Sunday during a 12-hour charity live stream we're doing for Game on Cancer, a fantastic organization that helps fund groundbreaking cancer research. We're going to have special guests and lots of crazy shenanigans, so I hope you'll join us. But if you can't make it, or you're just interested in grabbing an RTX 40 series GPU for yourself, then I've left a link to Gigabyte Aorus's website below. A big thanks to NVIDIA and Gigabyte Aorus for sponsoring the video, and a big thanks to you for watching it.